All too often, antinatalism gets compartmentalized into a space completely separate from religion. I think this is a mistake, because antinatalism can very much be applied despite one's religious beliefs. Not only that, but in order for antinatalism to be adopted more widely, pragmatically, people who are religious will have to be included. I will focus this episode on Christianity, though similar arguments can also apply to other major religions. Although I am not a religious scholar or expert in religion by any stretch, I do respect people's right to have religious beliefs, and as an antinatalist, I am compelled to do away with the myth that antinatalism can't be followed by religious people. My goal in this video is not to make an argument for or against Christianity itself, but rather to say that antinatalism can very much be compatible with Christianity. I should mention that if you are better acquainted with theology and there are egregious holes in my line of reasoning, feel free to comment below. To start, it is important to realize that religion in general is oftentimes as much of a culture as it is adherence to scriptural teachings. This means that what people actually end up doing as their religious practices can be related more to what the culture around them, within that religion, is doing, which is usually an evolving framework of viewing the world through selected scriptural teachings. Most of modern Christianity does not follow scripture literally. Rather, depending on the branch of Christianity, a set of traditions have evolved around different interpretations of portions of scripture. Therefore, not all of scripture is given the same weight and importance. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the Apostle Paul effectively views marriage as less than ideal when it comes to devoting oneself fully to God. But many Christians would place much more value on marriage than that. Cultural momentum has more weight than certain portions of Scripture. This phenomenon plays out in many other religious practices, including how procreation is viewed. In the short book, No Baby, No Cry, Christian Antinatalism, by Martin Smith, the author makes the argument that while the Old Testament often advocates for procreation, the same is not true of the New Testament. In the New Testament, he contends, people join God's kingdom through spiritual rebirth, not procreation. Therefore, procreation is not nearly as critical anymore. In some ways, Christ's conception and birth could be viewed as the last procreation necessary. If a Christian's goal is to live a life for God and making Him the center and purpose of one's life, procreation is more of a distraction. In fact, if idealizing anything other than God is considered a grave sin, this also includes idealizing one's children. Creating children in this context, at the very least, creates a temptation to move away from God. There are yet other arguments for a Christian to embrace antinatalism. We come back to the notion of suffering and doing harm. If one believes in hell, that is, the eternal damnation and separation from God, and one believes some people go to hell, then one has to consider that one of those people might be one's own child. Therefore, those who procreate not only subject their children to suffering in this life, but also the very high possibility of eternal damnation. I say very high because the New Testament makes it clear that the road to God is much narrower than the road to damnation. As a side note, the notion of the child being able to choose, as opposed to being destined, to follow God or not, is almost irrelevant here, since either way, the potential parent doesn't know prior to conception whether the child will be saved from hell or not. The only way to guarantee the child not going to hell is not creating the child, assuming the child's soul is created anew with the child. So how is it that most Christian traditions promote and encourage procreation? This goes back to the idea of religion as a culture. Many Christians cling to passages in the Old Testament promoting procreation, and this has created a culture of pronatalism without taking into consideration other portions of Scripture, particularly in the New Testament, that place less emphasis, or arguably no emphasis, on procreation. And it ignores that if people living now are at risk of being pulled away from God, so will new people that are created. A possible objection to Christian antinatalism is that by following antinatalism, a Christian is simply cherry-picking which part of Scripture to follow. This is a fair argument, but if valid, it also has to apply to all Christians. The fact is, following Scripture literally, or even following it metaphorically consistently all the time, is too difficult for the vast majority of people. So, if one is not selective, how is one to follow Christianity as set out in Scripture? Almost all Christians have to be selective, and if one is not okay with that, then one is effectively saying there are almost no Christians in the world. So, if one can be selective about which part of Scripture one follows, one can also be selective about which religious justification one follows to fit antinatalism. Therefore, a Christian has plenty of reasons to also be an antinatalist and not give up being Christian. As I mentioned at the beginning, although I have focused on Christianity, we could make similar arguments for other religions. My point is that prevention of suffering is a universal concept. It cuts across religions, cultures, races, and socioeconomic classes. If you are sentient, and compassion and harm prevention mean something to you, you can be an antinatalist and use your current circumstances and context to very reasonably justify it. Thanks for listening.